Good morning, everyone. Sadly, I can't offer you any Ethan tokens, but I promise a very kind of interesting and exciting talk that will, I think, build on some of the stuff that you just heard. So we're going to focus on Web3 and the future of startup equity. We've got two really great kind of founders with us. We've got Krists Avots, co-founder of Salto X, which builds upside tokens for distributed companies. And we've got Margarita Sivakova, co-founder of Legal Nodes, a cross-border legal services platform. So we haven't got much time, so I'm going to jump straight into it. First question is, what's the problem that you guys are trying to solve? So I'll first go to Krists.
How many of you know what employee stock options are? How many of you think that they're easy to use and you like them? Okay. How many of you work in remote teams? How many of you have tried giving equity to remote teams? How many of you succeeded in that? So that's basically the problem space we're operating in.
That's perfect. There we go. I'm investing. Margarita, what's your problem?
So we're building essentially a platform for startup founders and also, as of recently, Web3 founders to deal with the cross-border legal questions. So we work with companies that operate in multiple countries simultaneously, meaning they have to deal with legal questions in each of those countries because law is very country-specific. So we help them, instead of having a problem to go to each country, find a lawyer there, or go to a super expensive international law firm, we offer them legal notes. That is essentially a platform where we facilitate this company's work with the multiple legal providers in different countries.
Perfect. And Chris, kind of getting into that Web3 aspect of it, how does this help with the kind of solution that you're providing? And how does that kind of change the relationships, I suppose, between the companies, the employees, and kind of, I guess, any other kind of stakeholders in what you're doing?
So I think there are two parts. One is like the philosophy of it, like the previous speaker flashed DAOs. I think there's a lot to talk about that, and Margarita can definitely take a stab on the whole world of DAOs. But you see these communities that exist on the web, and they don't have legal entities. Well, some of them do, some of them don't. And there's just like complete extreme of libertarianism, where there's like no regulation. They share the value they're creating through tokens, and don't really deal with the stuff of governments and taxes and all that. So that's sort of on the one extreme of the spectrum. And then you have the regular companies, right? And I think there's a lot in between. I think Web3 community has shown like that being anywhere, anytime is super powerful. And that's sort of where we got a lot of inspiration of how can we make regular companies kind of going to the other side and being more free and flexible on how they are working with their contributors, how they are incentivizing them, and so on and so forth. So that's on the sort of philosophy side. And then Web3 gives you, by now it's fairly mature tech ecosystem. In our case, it just so much makes sense to use crypto for backend technology stack because, we deal with smart contracts between different parties. So trust is important there, transparency is important there. Over time, you want to have things like secondary trading. So crypto gives you great rails to do, whitelisted wallet trading and all of that. So it's just like, if we would be using Web2 technologies to solve the problem, it would take 5 times longer and would be a shitty experience. So it just makes sense.
And on that kind of question, like when people are kind of creating these compensation strategies, I suppose, on your platform, what are the things they do when they do it well? And I guess it's quite a new technology. So are people making mistakes? Do you offer kind of guidance on how people can set these things up in an efficient way, or in a way which properly incentivizes people? So
the whole world is learning, and last week we had a good chat with one Web3 startup. They've raised quite a lot of money in soft sale of future tokens, and asked them, well, what does your token represent? And they're like, well, we'll figure it out down the road. Yeah. I'm like, you're a shit ton of money, and you don't know exactly what kind of promise you're giving in exchange. Well, that's sort of reality. one way of doing things. There's a lot of exploring things, and we are exploring different means as well. But importantly, so one thing that we're not doing is we're not trying to just take existing sort of what's out in the classical Web 2 and transferring it to the chain. It doesn't really work. So we really had to think from ground up both the legal structures, the financial engineering logic behind the whole thing, and then sort of how to merge that with the whole crypto backend. So it's a lot of exploring, and yeah, continuous learning, and trying to figure out the best practice along the way.
Great. Margarita, if you wanted to pick up any of that, please do. But also, it would be useful or interesting to know about the kind of Web3 project, blockchain project you launched when the war began in the Ukraine, and kind of what happened with that.
Yeah, sure. And also on this point of tokens, I love how you said, we'll figure it out. Lawyers love that when you come in and you're like, so what is your token going to do? We're like, we'll figure it out. It's like, great. So what do we do now? Yeah, it's like... So that's part of what we also do. So when we've worked with Web3 projects already quite a few years, and it always comes down to legal structuring. So a lot of things we do at Legal Notes is deciding where to incorporate for such projects, because regulation varies between countries, and there are so many things you need to take into account. And so token is one of them, because in some countries it can be recognized as this security, and a lot of projects, they don't want that, because that comes with a lot of regulatory kind of challenges. So that's part of what we do. And when the war started, we had to basically think on our feet and think about how do we work with the most international client base. So how do we expand our international client base, essentially? And we chose Web3 as a focus because we had to focus on something that would move the bottom line the most. So Web3 was that. And the product we launched was DAO Legal Wrapper. And essentially, you've heard about DAOs already today. It's the decentralized autonomous organizations, but even they need a link with the real world. And that's usually where the law comes in, because unstructured DAOs, they run a risk for their members of a DAO that they would have the unlimited liability for the actions of this organization. And that is still a very big challenge, like a big problem. So DAOs have to be legal, not have to be, of course, but like this should usually be legally structured. So we came up with this kind of a DAO legal wrapper term, because you essentially wrap your DAO in a legal structure to protect the DAO members and also to implement the DAO constitution into the bylaws that become legally binding. So that is essentially what we did, and it works really cool, and it helped us to expand into international client base and get back to the pre-war metrics and actually grow from that. So that's the story.
Great, thank you. And kind of building on that, we were talking just before about kind of digital nomads and the impact of that kind of rising phenomenon. It's come up, I think, in quite a few of the sessions as well at the conference. So kind of how do you see that? And kind of we're in Estonia, which kind of led the way on that. Is Estonia still doing that? Are there other countries that you're seeing that take off in? It'd be good to get your insights on that.
Yeah, so with digital nomads, to be honest, I think I'm a digital nomad myself, so I've always lived between Ukraine and England, and also I've spent time in other countries. And what we also figured out that really our customers, so we sell to companies, but behind every company there is a founder. So we sell to founders, and the founders we sell to, they are usually digital nomads, because founders love their freedom. They want to live in different countries. They want to choose where to live, where to rent an apartment and travel and work from anywhere, really. So we take that into account when we work with startups, because it's not just the legal questions of a startup that we need to take kind of into account, but also a founder, the tax questions, the immigration questions of the founder who lives and travels. And in terms of kind of your question on Estonia, I think it's a great place. It's my first time in Estonia, in Tallinn, but I absolutely love it. And I do think that it is, for a reason, a digital nomad hub. So it's great.
I think it's my fifth time, but in 2 years. So once you come once, you'll
I think
you'll keep
I'm
coming
also
back.
Hooked.
Krists, it'd be good to get your kind of sense on the kind of question around government and which countries are doing it well and how that kind of interacts with your business and what you're offering.
I think well, first, things are fluid. Last week everyone was still raging about Portugal, zero crypto tax, and this week is like full-blown tax on crypto in Portugal. So, but I think most importantly is, in the whole Web3 ecosystem is just rapidly developing, and there's so much unknowns. And obviously the regulation, well, it can't catch up in no time. But a big question is, do the governments engage with the community and try to understand what these new technologies are bringing up, what kind of issues, and so on and so forth. And we've been heavily working with the regulators here in Estonia, and they really appreciate that. You can meet them, you can ask them questions, you don't get into jail for that. Great success. And they're actually curious about the whole thing. And I think also for governments, like crypto brings a lot of actually promise to make their life easier because of transparency. You have the data on chain and so on and so forth. So if they learn how to read the data, it becomes much more hard, to do some smuggling thing and so on and so forth. So actually, I think that, once the governments understand the benefits of, what this technology can bring to transparency and accountability, more and more could hopefully embrace that. But obviously, you have all sorts of cases, and there are still governments that are just trying to ignore that. There's nothing in there. We're not interested about that. Just move to other countries and so on and so forth. So, yeah. I hope more governments would just engage with the community and, try to figure it out together.
Yeah, I mean, we had a roundtable with blockchain entrepreneurs in the UK, and half of them told them that when they'd spoken to the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority over there, they'd been told behind closed doors they're better off just leaving the country rather than even trying to build their company there, which is an incredible place to be. But kind of on that front, just kind of following up, what are the kind of misconceptions that you see around kind of the way people talk about crypto, blockchain? Are there things that kind of really get on your nerves in misconceptions, or just a lack of understanding about the value? Because obviously you must be sold on it as the future, given that you're building a business around it.
I think, well, obviously, like if you look at last 2 years, I think a few days ago, Anders and Horowitz brought the State of Crypto latest report, and there's like one slide that I absolutely loved it. So it basically 4 metrics. So developer community activity on crypto, new startups in crypto, and there was a couple of other sort of community metrics, sort of, which show the strength of how the community is growing, and it was roughly like 60% year on year, give or take. And then was the market cap, how much money have put in crypto. That was obviously, a few weeks ago or a few months ago. Now it's all burned down. And that was like tripling every year on year. So basically there was like a big gap between the actual value that the ecosystem has accumulated versus what we as a community, thought it's worth and just, plow the money into. And then you get a lot of people, when your taxi driver starts to talk about trading coins, it's a bit of an issue, right? And obviously that creates a lot of bad wins in terms of when you use technology for meaningful purpose. Obviously there's a lot of misconception, it's another ICO scam or whatever, and it's just like, it was 2017, but people still talk about that. And that's the reality, but it pretty much has been the case with every sort of new emerging technology wave, so we just have to swim through that.
Margarita, do you have any kind of insights around the kind of, because you work with DAOs quite a lot, how that's developed over time, and kind of what your feelings are in terms of the way that's being received by the public or by governments or kind of by communities in general?
Yeah, I think it has gone kind of really far. Just like the whole Web3 space has really developed since I kind of got to work there first time and what it is now. And in terms of DAOs, I think they hold a great potential to completely redefine the way we see ownership and governance of organizations. So the decentralized ownership and governance implies that your community members, they would be able to have a say in how that organization is going to be run. And I think it's really powerful, and the best way to showcase that is by an example. So imagine if Uber's drivers were members of a DAO and they had a chance to vote on whether they get a tip or a commission, right? I remember there was a big talk about the Uber drivers not having the tip on the app. So if they were to vote, they would have kind of got that opportunity, and it completely redefines the way organizations can be run. And because we are in a way a marketplace, so for us it's also very powerful because. And I think that in the future, we will also, maybe in a very shorter future, we're going to look into that space for our own company. Because if you look at a marketplace, yes, technology is important, but it's not going to work without the supplier. In our case, it's a lawyer. In Uber's driver, in Uber case, it's drivers. So I think DAOs are going to really, really redefine the way platform and marketplace businesses are run, in my opinion.
Great. Krists, it'd be great to kind of hear about the product as it's developed. It was relatively new, but and kind of the lessons that you've learned along the way of kind of building it out.
That's a good one. We've been around for less than half a year, so it's been, I would say, feels like 3 years. And I think that's the beauty of crypto, that things are evolving rapidly. And when we started to build, so we didn't have kind of native crypto engineers in the team, but rather we had like very senior engineers who worked on different platforms and then sort of converted to the new religion, so to say, right? And you know, we talk a lot about that. It's not about like just learning a new language. It's changing the way how you think about building products as an engineer. So it is about like changing the mental model of how you build in many angles. And I think that sort of has been the fun part on the technology side, and seeing that there's like every week there's some new piece of technology that the community has developed, and you can think of, should we use that, and so on and so forth. Then of course it has been and it will be a challenging journey to make our vision complete. We have sort of multiple layers to crack through. So there's the technology layer, there's the legal layer, there's the taxation layer, and there's some sprinkle of financial engineering on top of that. And just putting all of those pieces together is really, really hard. And we've talked to so many smart people around each of those areas and trying to get the best of the knowledge, how to go about this and that. And it's just like, it is a massive learning curve, because there is no right way of doing things to be on the safe side, on the tax and legal and all of that. So when you have to build those bridges, it is just really, really complicated. But that's the only way how to crack it. So someone has to do that. Yeah.
Great answer. I'm going to ask the same question to Margarita, but I should say we're probably going to go to questions, because it'd be great to hear from you guys. So get thinking about that. Margarita, how about your kind of journey of the product? And obviously the war must have had an impact as well on the business. So yeah, it'd be great to hear about how you've developed in kind of reaction to that.
Yeah. So LegalNotes has been around for around 3 years, and it has been a very interesting journey. And I think if we changed the name of our company every time we made a pivot or we made a drastic change in the way our company is run or the product we're building, it would be like, I don't know, 3 different startup names. So it has been a very kind of exciting and challenging journey. So we started off really as a classic kind of matchmaking platform, clients on one side, lawyers on one side, and we discovered that this model doesn't work, and you need to build a really strong facilitation between the clients and the lawyers, because clients have no idea what it is that they actually need in terms of legal support. Lawyers are very narrow, specialized. So usually you would go to a corporate lawyer, they will give you a contract, and then you ask a question on a certain clause that triggers employment law, and they'll be like, no, you need to go to employment lawyer now. You're like, okay, you go to employment lawyer, and they're like, so, okay, this is a great contract, and how do I pay taxes on this? They're like, oh, no, you need to go to a tax consultant. And it's like every time a new person, and it's like a really difficult, I call it like a legal puzzle you need yourself to kind of put together. And so we discovered that was the main issue, and that's when the LegalNotes kind of 2.0 was born. And the way we work now is we have this concept of a virtual legal officer who essentially acts as your in-house lawyer and IT/project manager. So they manage the client, and they also help to manage multiple legal providers across different countries that we work with, and we call them legal partners. So that's kind of how LegalNotes has evolved. And in terms of how the war impacted us, I think the biggest impact was on the team and just kind of the whole kind of how we all reacted to that. And we I believe the team is the most important part of a startup, is the most important asset that you can accumulate. And of course, I've always kind of believed we have a great team, but after you kind of go through war together, I've realized we have like the best possible team, because we all, instead of being kind of, I don't know, paralyzed by it, we all went straight into work mode, creation mode. We volunteered, we did everything. So we actually worked more than before the war, and we've grown as a result. So and focused on Web3, introduced new product. We actually launched 2 more in the startup category. We've done so many different things. So that was our reaction to this kind of event. Yeah.
Thank you. So we've got about 8 minutes. So do we have questions from the audience at all? I don't know if there's a microphone. We've got a microphone, so just put your hand up. If not, I have lots more questions, so that's fine. I'll jump in, but do just raise your hand and kind of wave me down if you do. I'd like to get a little bit more into the kind of the problems around kind of startup equity that you kind of mentioned before. Like, Krists, what's the kind of problems that people run into? I mean, obviously, when you surveyed the audience, there was very clearly in agreement that there's a real problem there. But what are the actual kind of nuts and bolts? If I'm a founder and I'm thinking of doing this cross-border, what am I going to run into?
I think, well, there are a lot of issues, but like some things that have become more visible, with the whole COVID and all that, is, well, most teams are remote by default, or remote friendly. So you have much more diverse team composition, and there are so many ways how actually one can contribute to a company. You can be employed directly. You can use some sort of employer of record platform. Ton of those out there. So like Let's Deal, they have a stand here, remote, and so on and so forth. When you're like technically not employed by the company, but you're kind of a leased person, you can have your own company, freelance, and so on and so forth. And honestly, in most countries, all of those different employment forms, kind of stock option programs, are not eligible for those types of employment forms. So suddenly you have this problem that, like, yes, we can hire anywhere and we get the top talent in, I don't know, Moldova, but if you want to share the equity, incentives, then in many cases it's sort of either very, very hard or sort of outright illegal. And that means 2 things. And either, most frequent cases, what I've seen is that founders just like kick the can down the road and postpone creating incentive programs until the house is starting to burn, because they are at, Series A, and their investors are asking for it. Their team is asking well, you promised our, equity plans 3 years ago, and, because it's so complicated, obviously, so many things to do as a founder. And then so delayed programs, giving sort of worse terms for actual receivers, or the other part is scenarios where you just kind of try to give it out and leave it to the people to handle the implications. And in some countries, so it can be the case that, let's say, there was a startup in Estonia. They gave their option plan to their contributor in France, and that person got slapped with a full payroll tax on the future value of her equity program. So imagine you get a lottery ticket, and you haven't won yet, but you have to pay 65% tax, right? That's pretty ridiculous, right? And those can be the implications if you haven't thought it through. So, and because it's so complicated, people don't think it through. So many things that can go wrong there, and not to even mention, secondary. So if an employee wants to get early liquidity, good luck with that. You need to club together at least a sizable pool of your equity chunks, and go through all the legal hassle to do secondary and so on and so forth. And this is sort of where the beauty of Web3 can really come in handy. You have the transparent agreements, self-executing smart contracts. You can sort of whitelist the wallets that can trade with each other in the secondary market and so on and so forth. So that's up for grabs. I think that this space is just like so painful that there's like opportunity for quite a few unicorns. So encouraged to bring us more competition as well. So just let's fix it together.
It's like legal in a nutshell. It's so painful. There is lots of space for disruption.
Yeah.
And on that, Margarita, what kind of got you into Web3 as a company? Was it something that was just led by the market, by demand, or is it something that you kind of strategically set out to kind of capture?
So no, it was completely customer-led. So one of our biggest clients is a first layer blockchain, and they raised kind of a big round, and they've started building their ecosystem, and the projects built on that blockchain started to pop up. And then they would refer those projects to us for the legal questions. And when that number started kind of increasing, we saw a huge potential. And in a startup, there are two ways, right? It can be a pull market or a push market. And we always pushed because it's very kind of with startups, it was difficult sometimes to differentiate. But here, because there is literally nowhere to go, and you have no idea what to do in terms of legal. Do you need a legal structure? Do you not even? It was a pull for us, so they would come to us, and so that was a completely kind of customer-led decision, and the war just basically accelerated our move into that area.
Incredible. Last chance for any external questions. There we go, 2 at the front, so we'll go one at a time. So this gentleman on the left.
Hi, so my question is for Margarita regarding DAOs. My question is, often when you're creating a legal entity, like for the wrappers for the DAOs that you described, they require you to appoint a director or other legal representative who's often an individual. How do you combat that with DAOs to make sure that it doesn't form a hierarchical structure?
That's a great question. So usually the structure for DAOs that is now can be used as a foundation. And the way it works is that you have you have a manager and you have a guardian of a foundation. So foundation is like a type of a trust. So and also you have the members. So the members pass on a decision. It goes to a manager, and then that manager cannot not take that decision because there is also a guardian who is kind of after him if something goes wrong. So there is like a really smart way of structuring it because it's not just one manager making a decision. It's still there's still a few people involved, and that is essentially how that risk is essentially annihilated.
Great question, and yeah.
Yeah, well, you talked about secondary, and one of the issues with ESOPs is, of course, that employees cannot understand what it's worth. There's no way to trade it. It's so far in the future, it's discounted so heavily. Have you seen the initiatives to create a platform where someone could trade those slivers of employee stock-owned shares? It seems like that would be an interesting way to put a value on it and let an external person create a value for that employee and therefore trade in a market there.
There are actually few startups going from that angle of the problem. So there's one, I think, Simpler, that were helping pre-IPO companies to give their employees early liquidity, exactly, managing the secondaries. And there are a few others that give like kind of funding to exercise options early and all that. So the space is fairly vibrant. So there's some innovation going on in the sort of classical ESOP space, and then there's a lot of innovation going on, alternative vehicles, how to share the company upside without dealing with the legacy problems of ESOP. So definitely a very interesting space.
Great, thank you. I think we're coming up to the end. Just leaves me time to thank our wonderful kind of.
Can I ask one question for the audience?
Go for it.
Can you raise a hand if you do not regret spending last half an hour of your life being here?
Do not, yeah.
Okay, thank you for being in a lovely audience.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.